How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're starting Daf Yud Zayin, Daf 17 of Masechta BavaBasra. Friends, So we're starting today the second parak of Masechta BavaBasra. The parak is called Lo Yachpor. Do not dig. So there's going to be some technical stuff here. Okay. Gewaldig. Okay, yeah. So there's going to be some technical stuff here. At the end of Bav Mitzia, we started touching on some sugyas here in Lo Yachpor. There was at the end of Bav Mitzia, there was a bunch of stuff from Lo Yachpor. Today's daf is going to be kind of, the Gemara is going to get kind of technical. But alright, it's interesting enough. I think we should just hop in. We're going to start on Daf Yud Zayin, Omid Aleph, at the new parak, at the Mishnah. Lo Yachbar Adam Bar Samoch Libaro Shel Chavero. Okay. A person shall not dig a pit next to his friend's pit. So let's say you have Reuven and Shimon are neighbors, and between their properties there is a fence. Okay, we're going to call it the border fence. Okay, so if Shimon has dug a pit in his property, so Reuven shouldn't dig a pit too close to Shimon's. So again, Lo Yachbar Adam Bar Samuch Lebar Shechaver. Reuven should not dig his pit too close to Shimon's pit, because it could ruin Shimon's pit. V'lo siach, v'lo mayre, and not a ditch, not a vault. V'lo amas hamayim, not a irrigation channel, a water channel. V'lo nivreches kovstin, and not like some kind of pit for washing your clothing. Apparently, the way they would wash clothing or something, I don't exactly understand it. The way I wash my clothing is with a laundry machine. I take my clothing, put it in a laundry machine, and stick with detergent, and then at the end it beeps and 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 beeps until you turn it off. But back then, apparently, they would have this pit or something, and they would fill it with dog excrement and water, and leave the clothes in there for a few days or something, and then after that they would scrub it. I'm happy that we have detergent these days. Anyways, so that pit for the laundry stuff. So that also you shouldn't. So Reuven shouldn't dig that too close to Shimon's pit. Unless Reuven distances himself from the Shimon's wall 3 tfachim. All right, to create some distance. V'sad basid, and he also plasters the pit so that it's reinforced, and I guess no water will get out and leak and ruin the land and ruin ultimately Shimon's pit. So now the Gemara is going to ask, on the one hand we said Lo Yachbar Adam Bor Samach Lebor Shechaver, and then we're talking about the kosel. Okay, we'll get there in the Gemara. It's going to be a shtickle technical today, but anyways, let's just say for now, if Shimon's got a pit, so then Reuven shouldn't dig his own pit too close to Shimon's, because it can cause trouble for Shimon's. And if you have olive, leftover olives from the olive press or something, and you stack them up and it's composting and it gets hot and stuff, I guess. Zevel and manure, melach and salt, sid and lime, asloim and flintstones. You got to keep those away from your friend's wall. 3 tfachim. Away, okay, you don't want that because that stuff gets hot and you don't want it to be too close to your friend's wall. Osad basid, or either you got to keep it away or put up some kind of a plaster or something. Machikin esazroim v'samachresha, and we keep away seeds, right? If you plant things, right, because their roots can mess up with can mess things up. If If you could, you have to keep that away from your friend's wall, because if you plant stuff too close to your friend's wall, the roots can interfere with the foundation of the wall. Where am I? And don't plow too close to your friend's wall, because also you can be digging deep into the ground and it can ruin the foundations of your friend's wall. The esmei raglayim. There's an important, there's a very, nogei l'maaseh. Esmei raglayim in a kosel shoshet tvachim. Don't pee on your friend's wall. It's not just, it's an important thing. You know why it's important? Because it's a very important sugya. We're going to learn about it. We're going to learn about it more on Daf Yud Testament Beis. We're going to learn more about the halachas of peeing on somebody's wall. Now, why do I care so much about this? I care so much about this because where I live, people, mamish, mostly men, people just pee wherever they want. And then what happens is, so then the whole neighborhood smells like pee. So then what happens is, some people have this genius idea, why don't we call in the power washers? Because if the power washers come, then they'll wash away all the pee, and it won't smell anymore. Not true. It still smells. And you have a lot of noise from the power washers. So this is a sugya that's a very, it's a very important sugya. Are you allowed to just pee wherever you want or not? Okay. Now, so you have to keep plants and plows and pee away from people's walls. And then you probably also have to keep the power washers away from people's walls, away from people's houses, right? They power wash in residential neighborhoods. Maybe the power washing is going to ruin people's houses. Anyways, all right. And if you have a mill that Gemara can talk about what's the Indian with the mill. But if you have a mill that you use, you don't want to use it too close to the wall. You keep it 3 tefachim away, and whatever, a mill has 2 parts. The lower part is wider than the upper part, so it's 3 tefachim from the lower part, 4 tefachim from the upper part. An oven, also you gotta keep it away from the wall, 3 tefachim away from like the lip of the oven, which is, because the oven is wider on the bottom, it's wider on the bottom, so 3 tefachim from the wall, and the upper part of the oven 4 tefachim from the wall. Alright, fine. Now we get into the Gemara on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Frekt the Gemara, Posach bebor besiyem bekosel. Okay, this is going to be a very technical Gemara. So the Mishnah says, right, I'm going to go back to the Mishnah, right? Lo yachbar adam bar samuch lebar shel chaveru. A person should not dig a pit too close to his friend's pit. Okay, so it sounds like you have to, so Reuven's got to distance his pit from Shimon's pit. But it says, unless he gets away from his friend's wall, 3 tefachim. Wait, are we talking about Shimon distancing himself from Shimon's pit or from Shimon's wall? The wall sounds like probably like the border fence between the properties. So what is it? Is Reuven distancing his pit from Shimon's pit, from Shimon's wall? What's the deal? So Amar Abai says, Abai v'temer of Yehuda, mikosel boro shaninu. It means from the wall of Shimon's pit. So when we say the kosel, it's not talking about the fence between their properties. It kind of is. I mean, it's not talking about, when it says the wall that it's referring to is the wall of the pit. Now, what's the wall of the pit? The wall of the pit is the entire area between the pit and the border fence. That's all considered the wall of the pit. So if Shimon built his pit 10 tefachim from the fence, from the wall between their properties, so the wall of the pit is that 10 tefach area between the pit and the border of the property. So therefore, No, so the Reisha had said that Reuven has to keep his pit away from Shimon's pit, and it says that Reuven has to distance it from the wall. It means the wall of Shimon's pit, and the wall of Shimon's pit is the entire area between his pit and the border between their fields. V'lesnei elim kein hirchik mibaro shel chavero gimel tfachim. Okay, now the Gemara asks, but why not just say that Reuven needs to distance his pit from Shimon's pit, not from Shimon's wall? Now we had just explained, well, no, it says wall to teach me the wall of the pit, and that the wall of the pit is the entire area between the pit and the border, and like the border of the field. So what does it mean just to teach the pit? Oh, it's a very technical thing. Because memele, even if you would say, technically, even if you would say that Reuven has to distance himself from Shimon's pit 3 tfachim, memele, it would mean that that he has to, right? Because obviously Reuven is not gonna dang, I lost my train of thought. Right, because I think the idea is that mainly you can assume that Shimon is not going to be building his pit right up against his fence, right, of the boundary of the field. Mistama, it's like in his property a little bit. So therefore, Mistama, we're talking anyways about more than 3 tfachim from Shimon's pit, right? Meaning, right, so I said in our example that Shimon built his pit 10 tfachim away from the border of the field, okay? So, in that case, it's already more than 3 tfachim away from the pit itself. So if that, technically speaking, Reuven, I would argue, can already just build his pit right against the border of their field, since Shimon's pit is already 10 tfachim into the field. So what does it mean then when the Mishnah, and that would already be 3 tfachim. So then what does it mean when the Mishnah says that he has to distance it 3 tfachim from there? It's already 3 tfachim. Shimon's pit is 10 tfachim into his field. So what it means is 3 tfachim from the wall of the pit, which is the area between the pit and the border of the field, which means that Memela we're talking about 3 tfachim away from the border, meaning Reuven has to build his pit 3 tfachim into his own field. So therefore, Memela, I would know, so right back to the question of why doesn't the Mishnah just say that Reuven needs to keep his pit 3 tfachim away from Shimon's pit, right? Reuven needs to keep his pit 3 tfachim away from Shimon's pit, and Memela, I know that we're not talking about Shimon's pit itself, right? Because Mistama Shimon's pit is already, more than 3 tfachim away from the fence anyways, right? So when it says that Reuven needs to distance his own pit 3 tfachim, and Memela means the wall of the pit. So why not just say that Reuven needs to distance his own pit 3 tfachim from Shimon's pit, and I would know that it already means 3 tfachim from the wall of Shimon's pit, i.e. from Shimon's property. Shnikes. Not easy. Well, I don't know. It's just very technical. Kind of goes in like circles. But that's the question. So why not just say that Reuven needs to distance his pit from Shimon's pit 3 tfachim? It is letting us know the kosel bor. Wait, what did I just say? Well, so why not just say, right, that Reuven distances his pit from Shimon's pit 3 tfachim, and Memela I'll know that it means from the wall. So what it's teaching us is the kosel bor shlosh tfachim. It's teaching us a specific halacha that generally the wall of a pit is 3 tfachim. It's teaching us that the wall of a pit is 3 tfachim. Nafkamine, lemekach umemker, the nafkamine is for business deals. Keditanis v'lener b'ayso omer lechavero bor v'kosleo ani mocher loch. That if somebody says to his friend, I'm selling you a pit together with its wall, tzarich she'ei akosel shlosha tfachim. That means that the wall of the pit is be'etzim also selling the area around the pit 3 tfachim worth, right? That the wall of a pit Memela is 3 tfachim. So therefore, if somebody's selling a pit and its walls to somebody else, it means the pit with 3 tfachim around it, and that a wall of a pit is 3 tfachim is learned from the fact that we call it a wall in the Mishnah. It teaches that the wall of a pit by default is 3 tfachim. Shnaikis. That was just like a few lines, but it was so much detail packed into that line. Now, before we move on to the next portion of the Gemara, I think I will preface it with a refresher from the end of BavaBasra. It's going to come up, I think, also on Daf Chafei, so in about a week from today. There was a machlokes, if you remember, but I think it was BavaBasra, I think, yeah. At the very end, there was a machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and the Rabbanan regarding if Shimon has a pit in his property, okay, and then Shimon has a pit in his property, and Reuven plants a tree in his own property. So the Chachamim said that Reuven can't do it. He's got to cut down his tree. Right? It's alamazik, right? Laharchik is atzmo. I think it was alamazik laharchik it's atzmo or something. So according to the Chachamim, Reuven can't plant that tree if Shimon's pit is over there. And Rabbi Yossi said that alanizak laharchik is atzmo. That no. Shimon's property is Shimon's property. Reuven's property is Reuven's property. Shimon can do what he wants on his property. Reuven can do what he wants on his property. Shimon can dig a pit on his property. Reuven can plant a tree on his property, and that's no problem also. Okay? So according to the Chachamim, Reuven would have to cut down the tree because the roots are going to interfere with Shimon's pit. And according to Rabbi Yossi, Reuven can do whatever he wants on his own property. He can plant a tree, no problem. Okay. So now, Itmar, it was stated, Haba lismoch bitzad hametzer. So what if Shimon? So what if? Okay, you have Reuven and Shimon, they're neighbors. Okay. Now, neither one of them has thus far dug a pit. Pitless. There's no pit on either property right now. Shimon now is going to be the first. He's going to dig a pit. Shimon's going to dig a pit. The question is, can Shimon dig his pit, mamish, right next to the border? Meaning our Mishnah is talking about, don't dig the pit too close because it'll mess up Reuven, right? It'll mess up the other person's pit. Reuven doesn't have a pit. So can Shimon dig his pit, right up against the border, when Reuven doesn't have a pit? So there's nothing to worry about in that sense. So Idmar, we said about lismoch bitzara meitzer, if Shimon is digging a pit and Reuven doesn't currently have a pit, and he wants to mamish dig his pit right up against the border of the property. Abai Amar Somich. Abai says Gesundheit. Abai says sure, Shimon can do that. The Rave Omar, whereas Rave says Eino Somich. Whereas Rave says no, he can't. Rave says he cannot. He cannot. He still has to distance it 3 tvachim from the border. Bisodeo asuyo leboris. So now, there's different kinds of fields, right? Some fields get enough rainwater and they don't need pits for irrigation. Other fields don't get enough rainwater and they need irrigation pits. So if we're talking about Besodeh Asui Levoris, if we're talking about a field that does not get, right, both Reuven and Shimon's fields are fields that don't get enough rainwater, and therefore they, in order for the field to succeed, you will need to dig a pit, which means, it can be assumed that at least that, even though Reuven doesn't currently have a pit, he may decide to dig one at some point in the future. That is entirely possible. So in that case, divrei hakol eino somech, even Abaye would say that Shimon cannot dig his pit right up against the border because, inevitably, Reuven, we can assume that, right, that inevitably Reuven's going to dig a pit and we don't want Shimon's to be too close. Ki plige, where they argue and where Abaye says that Shimon can get right up to the border, is besode she'eino asuya livoris, is a field that gets enough rain water. And therefore it's not a given that Reuven will at some point build a pit, dig a pit. So Abaye Omer Somech. So Abaye says that Shimon can dig his pit right up against the border because there's no assumption that Reuven is ever going to dig a pit and there won't be any issues. We're talking about a field that gets enough rainwater. There's no assumption that Reuven at some point is going to build a pit. He's going to dig a pit, and therefore if Shimon wants to dig a pit, he can dig it wherever he wants. Ravi Omer says, Ravi Eino Somech, Shimon cannot get too close. The Amalek, because Reuven will say to Shimon, Ki echi da'atim lach v'chafart onanami mamlachno v'chafarno. That Ravi says that Reuven could say to Shimon, hey Shimon, just like both of our fields get enough rain. Shimon, just like you decided that you wanted to build a pit, I can also decide that I want to build a pit, and therefore I don't want you building your pit too close because it can ruin mine. Ikadamru, to those who say, Besade she'eino asuya livoris, that when it comes to a field that gets enough rain, well, in that case, everybody agrees that you can get close. Divrei hakol somech, everybody agrees that Shimon can build his pit wherever he wants, because these are fields that get enough rainwater. Ki plige, where they argue, is besade asuya livoris, is by fields that don't get enough rainwater and rely on irrigation pits. So Abaye Omer says, Abaye Somech, Abaye says, even so, if Reuven doesn't currently have a pit, Shimon can put his pit wherever he wants, even right up against the border. And even though these are fields that rely on irrigation pits, because afilu l'Rabbanon, now getting into the machlokas between Rabbanon and Rabbi Yossi, even according to the Rabbanon, the Amri that they said, marchikin eso ilon min abor esrim v'chomesh amo, even according to the rabbis who say that in that case it was Reuven with the tree and Shimon with the pit, that Reuven would have to distance his tree from Shimon's pit to avoid damage. But that's because at the time that the tree was planted, the pit was already there. But in this case, but Abaye argues that in this scenario, however, when Shimon is digging his pit, Reuven doesn't currently have a pit. And therefore even the rabbis would say that Shimon can put his pit wherever he wants, even right up against the border. That's what Abaye would argue. Rava Omar, and Rava argues, fakert. Eino somech, that Shimon cannot put his pit right next to the border, because Vafil Rabbi Yossi, even according to Rabbi Yossi, who says each person can do whatever they want in their field. Rabbi Yossi says by the tree and by the pit, that Reuven can put his tree in his field. It's his field. Can do whatever he wants. Shimon puts his pit in his field. Each can do whatever they want. That Shimon can dig his pit in his field, in his property. Reuven plants his tree in his property. But Hane Mile Hosam, not specifically over there. Because at the time that Reuven, in that case, is planting his tree, at that time it's not causing any damage to Shimon's pit. Later on, over time, the tree will grow and it'll develop roots, and over time, those roots can cause trouble for Shimon's pit. Fine. But at the time that Reuven plants it, he's not doing anything wrong at that time, and therefore, Rabbi Yossi says, look, Reuven can do what he wants in his property, Shimon does what he wants in his property. Aval hacha, but over here, when Shimon builds his pit, he's mamish, he's going to be, if he, Rava argues that if he's digging the pit right next to the border, Amarle, Reuven can say to Shimon, Kol mara umara de kol machyas kol maipas lila aroi. Every single blow of the spade is making my property weaker. And therefore, Reuven can argue against it, right? So, in the case of the tree and the pit, when Shimon has a pit and Reuven has a tree, Rabbi Yossi says Reuven can plant the tree. It's no problem because at the time that Reuven plants the tree, he's not causing any harm to Shimon at that time. But in our case, when Shimon's putting his pit right up against the border, Reuven says, "Wait, you're going to be knocking away, Darton. You're going to have a spade. You're going to be spading and doing and thising and thating right next to my land. It's going to weaken my land." Reuven doesn't want it. He says it's causing me material damage right now. All right. So that's machlokas between Abaye and Rave regarding when Shimon wants to install a pit when Reuven doesn't yet have one. Where does the machlokas apply? Okay. Now we're gonna do one final push on today's daf to flesh out this machlokas between Abaye and Rave. Okay, this gets a little bit technical, but hopefully we'll be able to halt cup and get through it. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah. I guess we probably have to go slowly and hopefully not confuse ourselves. Lo yachbar adam bor samoch liboro shel chavero. So our Mishnah had said that let's just say, I think I probably explained the Mishnah Reuven planting the pit when Shimon already has one, but maybe let's flip it around just because we're talking about Shimon planting digging a pit here, so maybe let's talk about Shimon just to keep that, I don't want to confuse us as much as possible. So Tanan lo yachbar adam bor samuch lebor shechavero. So our Mishnah says that Shimon can't dig his pit too close to Reuven's pit. Meaning, our Mishnah seems to be talking about that Shimon can't get too close only when Reuven already has a pit. But we're talking about when Reuven doesn't have a pit. So the implication in our Mishnah would be that in that case, Shimon can dig his pit according to our Mishnah, in that case, wherever he wants. Sounds like Abaye. So Tanan lo yachbar adam bor samach leboru shel chavero. So our Mishnah says that Shimon can't dig his pit too close to Reuven's pit. Tamdiika bor. That's because Reuven has a pit. Holeka bor. But if Reuven doesn't have a pit, somech, Shimon could put his pit wherever he wants. So then how do you explain for Rava, who says that Shimon needs to keep the distance even when Reuven doesn't have a pit? Well, we had just offered two ways to understand the machlokas, right? Right? Now, in one way of explaining the machlokas, we said that everybody would agree that if it is a field that gets enough rain, well then even Rava would say that Shimon can build his pit wherever he wants. So if that is the case, well then our Mishnah, which implies that Shimon can't get too close when Reuven has a pit, but if he doesn't have a pit, he can get too close. Well, you can say, okay, well, our Mishnah is talking about a field that gets enough rain. So, Bishlam Malach Lishna Da'amrit Besada She'ena Asuya Laboris. So, as I just explained, so according to the way that explained the machlokas between Rava and Abaye, that it was taught that it's talking that when it comes to a field that does not need irrigation pits because it gets enough rain, then Rava would also agree that Shimon can dig his pit wherever he wants. Well, then our Mishnah, which implies that Shimon can dig his pit wherever he wants when Reuven doesn't have one, so our Mishnah is just simply talking about a field that doesn't require irrigation pits. It gets enough rain. Elo lachlishna de omart bisade she'ena asuya levorus plige. But according to the one who says that Abaye, according to the one who says that they both agree when it comes to a field that requires irrigation channels that does not get enough rain, even Abaye would agree that you cannot get too close. And where they argue is by a field that does not get enough rain, by a field, you see, this gets so confusing. That the machlokes is by a field, what was it? She'ena asuya leborus, because it does get enough rain. That when a field does get enough rain, still Rava would say that you can't get too close. Well, then that means that there is no scenario where Rava says that you can get too close. But our Mishnah implies that when Reuven doesn't have a pit, Shimon can get too close. So then, what do you do with our Mishnah? Right? Because our Mishnah clearly implies that when Reuven has a pit, Shimon can't get too close. When Reuven doesn't have a pit, Shimon can get too close. So Rava says, though, that when Reuven doesn't have a pit, Shimon still cannot get too close. So what scenario would our Mishnah be, according to Rava? So we had said that, well, there was one way that said that when it comes to a field that gets enough rain, everyone agrees that you can get too close. Okay, so it's talking about a field that gets enough rain. But the other opinion was that no, it's a field that doesn't get enough rain. This is so confusing. Wait, what? We said that everyone agrees that when it's a field that gets enough rain and therefore doesn't need pits, everyone agrees that you could plant it, or you could put your pit wherever you want. So therefore Rava will say it's talking about our Mishnah is talking about a field that gets enough rain and therefore doesn't need pits, and that's why you can put it wherever you want. Oh my gosh. But according to the way that explains that the machlokes is when the field gets enough rain and doesn't need pits, and still Rava says that you can't get too close. So what's the deal with our Mishnah that says that you can't get too close only when Reuven has a pit? But if Reuven doesn't have a pit, you can get too close. What would be the case where, how would Rava explain that? Sorry, this is really confusing. So according to Abaye, it's fine, right? Meaning our Mishnah is saying that Shimon can't get too close when Reuven has a pit. When Reuven doesn't have a pit, Shimon can get too close. So if that's the case, according to Abaye, it's great. That's literally Abaye's opinion. But Rava Kasha, but how's Rava going to explain our Mishnah? Rava will say, well, ha'itmar Allah, didn't we explain? Amar Abaye, says Abaye, v'tem Rav Yehuda mikosel boro shaninu, that the Mishnah is talking about not getting too close to Reuven's pit, but getting too close to Reuven's border, right? That's what, right? We said it, right? Because we said, why does it start out by saying pit and then it ends up saying kosel? We said, it's talking about that's in the border of the field. So it's not saying whether Reuven has a pit or doesn't have a pit. What it's saying is that Shimon can't get too close to Reuven's pit. Shimon can't get too close to Reuven's property. And therefore that, so it doesn't imply that he would be able to get too close. If there is no pit, it's not talking about if there's a pit or not. What it's saying is that Shimon can't get too close to Reuven's property. Okay, fine. Ikadamr, to those who say. So Abba goes up, adds some words here. Shimon shouldn't dig his pit too close to Reuven's pit. We talked about Amar Abaye v'tem Rav Yehuda mikosel boro shaninu. That Abaye himself says, some say Rav Yehuda, that it's saying that Shimon can't get too close to the end of the property. So it is not implying that when Reuven doesn't have a pit, Shimon can get as close as he wants. No. We're saying that mikosel boro shaninu, i.e. that Shimon has to stay 3 tvachim away from Reuven's property. That Shimon can't get too close. He has to stay away from Reuven's property. Regardless if there's a pit or not, he has to stay away from Reuven's property. He can't get too close. So bishlama lach lishna de amart. So I understand if we say, oh gosh, bisadeh asuya livoros divakol eno somech. Okay, so according to the opinion who says that when it is a field that requires pits because it doesn't get enough rainwater, therefore everyone agrees that Shimon cannot get too close no matter what, right? Because it's a field that requires pits. So if that's the case, so you could just say that our Mishnah is talking about that, a field that requires pits, and therefore Shimon can't get too close in any case. He can't get too close. So Abaye would just say that the Mishnah is talking about a field that doesn't get enough rainwater, that requires pits, and therefore Shimon can't get too close. That's why the Mishnah is saying that no matter what, Shimon can't get too close. But according to the one that said, the way that said, Bisada Asuya Liboris Pligi, that even in a field that requires pits, Abaye still says that you can get too close, i.e., in any case, Abaye says that you can get too close, even when it's a field that requires pits. Well, then how do you understand our Mishnah according to Abaye? B'shlama the Rava, I understand according to Rava, who says that in any case, Shimon would have to stay away from the border. Okay, that's what our Mishnah is saying, right? It says that you have to stay away from the border of Reuven's field. But Abaye Kasha, according to Abaye, who says that Shimon can get right up against Shimon's Right. Shimon can get right up against the border. How would you explain that? Because the Mishnah is saying that you have to stay away from the border. So Abaye would say, our Mishnah that says that you have to stay away from the border is when Reuven and Shimon are mamish digging their pits at the same exact time. So because Reuven and Shimon are digging their pits at the same exact time, that's why the Mishnah says that Shimon has to stay away from Reuven's from the border. But if Abaye would say that our Mishnah would agree that if Reuven did not have a pit at all, and he wasn't digging one either, then Shimon would be able to get up to the border. Okay, wow, that got pretty technical at the end. But anyways, today we started the second parak of Masechta BavaBasra, parak Lo Yachpor. Essentially, it was talking about making sure pits don't get too close and causing damage. And I guess that's going to be the theme of this parak. Hopefully it's going to be Gavaldig. Hope you enjoyed it. Peace out.